Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the North Andover Finance Committee. Today, March 20, 2023. This is Chris Allen. I am the vice chair because Donovan could not make it this evening. So we're going to be running the show here. I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have two members who are with us remotely. And because of that, any votes that we might take, we will have to have a roll call vote to make that happen. So I'm just making sure that the two of you are okay then, and you can hear us okay. Regina's okay. You're okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So, all right. So first on is our call to order, which we have done, and we will try the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we also can go right to public comment. Is there anybody here who has public comment? Come on, Stan. Okay, not tonight. All right.
At the end.
All right, next up, we have a couple of folks here to talk to us about their pieces of the warrant. And first off, we have Community Preservation Committee recommendations, and we have Chair Brian Roach, the famous Brian Roach. Famous. Near to being famous. I have the wrong guy.
Let me just plug in here. This worked easily last week, so we'll see if we're as lucky today. And I don't know if this made it into your meeting packets or not, if everyone has it already.
Actually, I had it from the meeting that I watched. I watched your meeting the other night, so.
Oh. Well, I'm sorry to have to make you sit through it again.
Well, it's okay. It was very informative. Try to
you guys can see, is it the TV working in front of me?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me see if I can get this to the right setting. There we go. Good evening. I'm Brian Roach, Chair of the Community Preservation Committee. I've got Tim Shearhart over my shoulder, who's here observing, but also a member of our committee. Here to present to you the fiscal year 2024 appropriation report. First, I'd just like to go over just our current membership here. A lot of names that you'll see, you'll recognize from other work throughout town. I like to call them out every year for the great work that they do on behalf of the committee. More than half of our committee is representatives from other committees in town. So they've already got an obligation, and then they meet once a month with us to run through this year a whopping number of projects. So I do like to recognize the efforts that they put forward and the dedication that they show throughout the year. Also, great thanks to Jean Enright and Bernadette Curran, our staff, who make my life dramatically easier as we go through this process. A few things I want to cover today. I'll give a quick look back of a few things that we accomplished since the last time we spoke. I'll run through the numbers, and then I'll go through our recommendations for the year. A couple things that we did in our kind of looking back moment. We did adopt bylaws. So this is the 22nd year of community preservation in North Andover, and now we finally have bylaws. So this will help. The idea is that this will help guide future committees on process, on procedures, on any of those gray area questions that might come up throughout the year. So I'm happy we got that accomplished. We also continued our efforts on the overall signage program. If you guys remember last year, for those of you who do, we adopted a comprehensive sign package as a part of our application. So for any land acquisition project or fields project or anything else that has some sort of a public-facing element, we want the taxpayers to know this is your CPC dollars at work. So that is a required part of all of our applications now, and we're running through all the old projects to make sure that they have appropriate signage. So you should hopefully start seeing that pop up around town. For an example of what it looks like, if you head out, I guess it would be Dale Street, and look at the Glenny Woodlot, which we acquired a couple years ago, there's a nice sign there. It's a great example of what we're going to hopefully start seeing around town. And I should say, I'll defer to the chair to how you want to run the meeting. I'm happy to take questions as we go or hold them to the end.
Well, all right, I guess something props up, anybody can just feel free to pop in. Sometimes it's easier that way, but.
That's fine. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks. Okay, these numbers have been thoroughly vetted by Lynn, not by me. You'll see we have about $15 million in change in the fund currently, just under $6 million in current encumbrances. The biggest chunk there, obviously, is the middle school fields project under open space. Historic preservation, we got a couple of things sitting from previous Ridgewood applications, and affordable housing is largely the kitchen and bath renovations that we funded a few years ago, which were severely delayed by COVID. That's most everything has an explanation. Usually you don't have that large of an encumbrance sitting against the project.
So the encumbrances are projects that were previously approved?
Correct. But dollars have not been spent, so they're sitting allocated as a hold.
For a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
too, so.
So what we tend to do a couple times a year, just on that point, is we'll run through each project and see if it can be closed out. Some are projects that just have remaining balances, but the project has been completed. Others, although far more rare, sometimes it's a project we fund that doesn't come together. We've funded in the past some land acquisitions that subsequent negotiations weren't able to materialize, so you had a large encumbrance, and eventually we vote to close it out if it's the time.
Can you real quick tell us what, I mean, like I know what the open space recreation, I know what the middle school project is and about why, but was there a particular project for historic preservation there that the encumbrance is on, and affordable housing, or are those a variety of projects?
Affordable housing, the biggest chunk of that was in the kitchen and bathroom renovations
Yeah.
that we put together. I think it was like a $1.4 million project.
Okay, yeah.
That was severely delayed by COVID.
Yeah.
Both getting in and out of the residences was really challenging, then getting contractors to be able to do the work
Yeah.
was really challenging. So
Totally understandable.
that one got delayed. Historic preservation, I'll have to double check on that. We funded a number of large projects, so that one I think is a little bit more spread out.
Okay.
But I'll have to go back and look, and I'm
Okay.
happy to shoot you an email.
Just curious.
to clarify
as
that
to
for you.
like why they would, I mean, you think it was COVID that holds those back also?
Probably less so on the historic preservation front, but we do have, we do have monthly reports that are always available. I think if you look in our meeting packet from our last
Oh,
meeting,
all right.
you can see exactly what projects have what balances, so where things
will
have been
do that.
spent. There you go.
That's
Not that I'm looking to assign homework tonight.
Yeah. No,
So-
but that's easier than you trying to, come up with, that's fine.
No,
It's
it's
already
fine.
out there.
I'll make sure you guys have access to it, so.
No worries.
Again, going through our projected revenue, you'll see we're looking at a little over $3 million in anticipated revenue between now and the end of the fiscal year, leaving an available balance just over $9 million. We are recommending about $2.2 million in projects this year, leaving us with a healthy, free and clear sum of just shy of $7 million in the fund, which is good to have. I mean, you don't want that to get down too low, because you never know when a big project may or may not come up, whether it's a land acquisition or something towards affordable housing. Those always tend to have bigger tickets, so it's good to have that reserve for when you need it. Any questions on the numbers that I can promptly refer to Lynn?
See, you
What's
fixed,
the state match, Frank?
So the state match is,
The percentage?
the percentage is, I don't know if that's a full percentage of our revenues. It's more based on their receipts, which I believe come from title stamps or at the registrar. There's a handful of things. Last year it was probably in excess of $600,000. It was probably $650,000. It was, I think, one of the biggest matches we've gotten.
It had been very low on a percentage basis for a number of years, and
Right.
is it popping back up?
Yeah.
Because I don't know what the denominator is. Is it 1.9 million? Or the 600,000 over the 1.9 million?
Correct, but
Okay,
I
so
don't know.
about 33% or a little
But I don't
over
know
30%.
that I mean, that's what it would, that's the math work out, but I don't know if that's what drives the state match.
Okay.
It's not just because.
There may be other,
Yeah, so the state has a separate source of revenue. So ours comes from, surcharge on property taxes.
Okay.
The state match comes from other receipts at the state level. I think it's, again, at the Registry of Deeds, and there's a couple of other things that they put, small tax on that funds the overall community preservation fund. Then they allocate that out, I believe, on a pro rata basis to towns.
Okay.
So, but I'll get further clarification on that. But it does,
it's not important. I was curious
Yeah.
as to what the match is.
no worries. And Lynn, feel free to tap me on the shoulder if I'm saying anything incorrectly, please. Thank you. So this year we had a bumper crop of sorts for applications. Like last year we funded 6. This year we got 17 applications that came before us. So I wish I could say that there was a rhyme or reason to why we got more in one year or not. Some folks are really good at asking for it. Other times it's just when projects come around. So we're in many ways, while we can do a lot of community outreach, we're beholden to the projects that actually end up materializing for various reasons. So all told, we received requests about $2.7 million. Based on our deliberations and our vote, we dropped that down to a $2.2 million in recommended projects. We denied 2 applications, we reduced 1, and we took no action on a 4th. So, and I should note, as we get into the specifics of the project, if you know, under affordable housing, we have the 10% threshold, which was estimated around $200,000. I think that will actually be a lot more, but that $200,000 is what I do carry forward to the 2.2 million below. We'll get into it in the end, but we will know what that exact number is, hopefully not too soon. We have a minimum threshold that we're required to fund in 3 categories, so open space, historic preservation, and affordable housing. If you have no projects for one of those categories, you have to hold and reserve 10% of your accounts, essentially your accounts receivable for the year, against future projects. So you can't spend all your money in one bucket, you have to hold back some. So again, we'll talk about when we get to that particular application, but essentially we're granting the full 10% because it was either give them the money or hold it in reserve anyway for that particular one. So any questions so far on the big picture math? And this is, if you looked at the select board presentation, I had some transposed numbers, this is corrected, so.
Okay.
Here's how our breakdown looks for the year. Obviously, a good amount going into historic preservation and some more into affordable housing. And assuming every recommendation that we make this year moves forward, this is what CPA all-time allocations would look like. So not entirely balanced. We'd like to, hopefully see that affordable housing portion boost up a little bit to get us a little bit more in line with an even allocation. So. And for the thresholds, just so we're clear, open space and recreation count together, right? So if you have an open space project or a recreation project, they count to the same 10% threshold, whereas historic preservation and affordable housing stand on their own. Okay. And we have a kind of a running chart by year of what we've done for allocations, which I believe is posted in our meeting packet, but I'm happy to share that as well if anyone wants it. So. All right, if there's no other questions, we'll get into the actual applications. So first up is phase 2 of what we're calling the Lake Access Project. This is no longer called a boat ramp for a variety of reasons. Last year, Ted Kelly, just a citizen who wanted to be able to go fishing, teamed up with the DPW to look at the existing lake access point in the north end of Lake Achicowik. He came to us with a project that had 5 major steps to getting everything ready to be constructed. Last year, we said, okay, let's take a step back, and we're just going to fund the first 3. Let's see how viable and how feasible this is, and make sure that you've worked with all the requisite stakeholders, namely the town, Concom, planning, everyone who's responsible for managing the lake. He did that, did an excellent job, and what you see, kind of included in this here is a conceptual design of what they're proposing for the lake access. So he came to us now for the final 2 steps that he had asked for the previous year, and once those are completed, they'll be ready to move forward to construction. This is for really hand carry boat access, no trailers, no motors, as per lake regulations. That was something very important from the planning board. What I think the committee noted that was really interesting is that this could provide some access to folks who aren't boaters just to view the lake, right? If you're older or physically impaired and you have a hard time accessing any of the trails that allow you to view the lake in a normal way, or just in a convenient way, this could provide an opportunity for you to do so. Park, have a picnic, whatever it may be. And it looks like there's enough capacity so far in the design to be able to handle that. So that's one of the things that we.
Is that a little parking area beside it too in the top?
So yes, on the
right?
top you can kind of see it's the gray area is impervious parking. Pervious parking, sorry, I think that's what's going to be required.
Nice.
And the rendering below shows kind of what it might look like for a gradual sloped area down there. One little wrinkle is that the fire department does need access to the lake for their trailer, for the way that they're able to do it. So they got to work in that into the design, but also be able to prevent people from showing up from out of town and dropping a boat in the water.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
but committee recommended favorable action on this project for just shy of $90,000. Next, the North Andover Historical Society came to us with a request of just over $130,000 for renovations on the interior of Parson Barnard House. These are a little bit of deferred maintenance and other projects that need to be done to stop current deterioration and improve public access to the building. Not a whole lot of discussion on this one, bit of a no-brainer. It's one of the more iconic buildings in town,
Yeah.
so the committee was happy to fund this one. Additionally, the Historical Society came before us for historic artifact preservation. These were a number of historic items that were being housed in the basement of the Grange. And while they were held there, they were not in the best preservation conditions, right? So they developed some mold, some other deterioration. I'm sure there were some insects that got into them. But now that they are out of the Grange and they have the opportunity to be better stored and displayed in some of the Historic Society's new buildings, they'd like to go through the effort of restoring them so that they can be properly categorized and displayed. And the committee voted favorable action on that. Next up, the Community and Economic Development Department came to us for a historic preservation master plan, which would cost, they're estimating, just over $30,000. I take that back. They're expecting the cost to be a little larger, but they are seeking a grant from the Mass Historic Commission. They've been advised that Mass Historic does not typically give a 50-50 matching grant, so they did come to ask for additional money for us, just because there's not enough money to go around. The goal behind this would be to review all things historic in town. That is our current policies, procedures, committees. We have several historic based committees here in town for various reasons. That I think they want to evaluate everything and make sure that our efforts are as effective as they possibly can be. So like any master plan, at the end this will result in a document, right? Something that will guide future priorities for not just the Community Preservation Committee, but certainly for all of the historic committees in town, in terms of what projects are most important and most critical to fund at various times. I did have some questions as to whether or not this was applicable or eligible for CPC funding, but we did see that the town of Falmouth and the town of Sudbury had also used CPC dollars to fund their historic master plans, so there is some precedent for that. And I should just make note, all of this is being reviewed by town council currently, every application here, just to confirm eligibility within CPC guidelines. So
Pretty modest request, too.
yeah, it is. It's the kind of thing that I think is going to really benefit, it really inform all the other groups. So we've done it, whether it's the overall town master plan, fields master plan. We did a needs assessment for the housing authority. Those kinds of documents are really just good public policy when it comes to setting priorities. So the trustees of reservations came to us for just under $60,000 to restore the historic landscape mural, which is up on the second floor of the Stevens Coolidge estate. This has not been open and available to the public in the past. Their goal is to further open this house and open the grounds. And to do that, they want to get the mural restored. This was a little bit trickier for the committee in terms of approving it. We had some requirements that were going along with that. They wanted to see better public engagement, better relationship between the trustees and the town. So we had some very specific asks of the trustees in terms of improving public access, not only to the grounds and the buildings, but also some of their signature events such as winter lights, getting the schools in, whether it's elementary school students, on a regular program to tour the building and learn about the house and grounds, as well as the school administration being able to use the building for various offsites that they may want. We received some good commitments from the general manager of the estate to move forward with that. The select board also asked if we could do something along the lines of community days, where access to the property is free to North Andover residents during designated days of the month or of the year. And they did say that they are certainly open to that. So it's still a little bit gray in that sense, but that was a contingency of the committee. So this is one of the things the town council is looking at pretty closely to make sure that we can have a grant agreement that has some teeth into it. Because if for whatever reason we cannot, I think we would probably need to revisit this particular application.
So you're looking for a document that reflects your requests?
Correct.
Very specific language?
Correct.
Because it does seem to me like, restore a mural, beautiful, but only if the public gets to go in and look at it.
Correct.
And right now, that simply is not the case.
Correct. Now, the intent of why they want to restore it is to be able to open it up to the public.
Right.
But where the rub is, right, well, their public is paying members.
Right.
Not necessarily the residents of North Andover.
Exactly.
So we did say very specifically, we want more. There's a few things, specifically in working with the youth center and working with the schools, and they have hired an elementary almost liaison to work with schools.
Yeah.
To improve upon that. I know there's a lot of concern throughout town that maybe they haven't been the best neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think we certainly addressed that, or we've addressed that concern. Whether or not it ends up in the can end up in the final document is a different matter. But our intent was that the warrant article would reflect those requests, which then get translated into the grant agreement, which then gives us more teeth to get the trustees to honor their
Yeah.
commitments.
This one is a little bit, it's, okay, it's a little more interesting as you put it. Okay.
Yeah, no, I
I'm not
certainly
gonna-
understand. And
not
it's
gonna
also,
hold you
and
on
listen, the other comment, it's not a town-owned asset,
Right,
right?
exactly.
So we certainly understand that.
And the promises of things those things haven't always come about, even
Right.
with just so, yeah,
No, it's fair, and that's why we want to make sure that if we can't have teeth, then
yeah.
we're going to have to
Okay,
reflect that in
that's fair.
what town meeting decides, so. Next up, the trustees of the library came to us for a revised supplemental application to a previously approved CPC project to reconstruct or restore the steps on the north side of the Stevens Library. If you're familiar with the building, there's a little bit of an alcove that goes underneath these. That would get removed and everything get filled in and built up. Part of the challenge has been bidders have not been forthcoming. There have been a lot of them, and we're not quite sure why there haven't been bidders. There's speculation that either they're looking at our budget and saying you don't have enough. So the trustees have gone and gotten additional guidance from other builders to try and, that's what this supplemental number comes from. So the idea would be to start a RFP process and see what you get for bidders.
We normally bid to build the stairs.
I think it's a handful of specialized folks who even do this
That's
kind of work.
interesting.
It's a complicated project in a lot of ways. It's got to meet National Historic Landmark standards. And for contractors these days, they have a lot of options
Yeah.
of where else to spend their time. So,
Seems worthy.
of course, right? And hopefully, we're hopeful that this will kick it off and get it going. If not, the trustees may have to go back to the drawing board or find a way to get this project completed. So. The next is the first of 4 applications we received from the Ridgewood Cemetery Association. It's in the amount of $225,000, and this is specific to the second burial ground. If you recall, we previously funded efforts at second burial ground when Ridgewood Cemetery took it over from the North Parish Association. They've done a good amount of work. They received a $15,000 grant from the Mass Historic Commission that is specific to restoration efforts for Revolutionary War soldiers, of which they believe there are 8 currently buried in the cemetery. One of the things they've discovered as they begin their restoration efforts here is, you dig back years and years of thatch and you find pieces of headstones that have been discarded or fallen over whatever the years and have kind of been buried. So they are trying to make some decisions as to exactly what they need to do to refoot those existing headstones, whether they leave things to let them lie. They're going through a number of decisions on that. They've also found in one corner of the cemetery a number of footstones that had been removed and discarded over the years. They speculate because it just makes it easier to mow, so you're not hitting those little stones as they come about. So I think part of the plan would be to possibly reset those as well. Unlike an active cemetery, and we'll get to Ridgewood in a second, this really is a historic part in town where, when the committee initially funded this project, the anticipation was you're going to see more school groups and other groups coming here learning about North Andover's rich history right here in the second burial ground in a very well-located location. Next up, Ridgewood asked for $25,000 for a project that was originally funded, I think, back in 2007 and then got sidetracked. Maybe it was 2009. I'll have to double check. But this is to digitize existing historical records that they have. So this dates back to the original layout of the cemetery. It's genealogical records. it's a lot of historic items that they have that both need to be preserved for, mostly for genealogical research, but also as documents for the original layout of the cemetery. This is one that we did receive some additional documentation from the Ridgewood Board about specifically what would be restored as a part of this. Town Council did have some questions on this one in particular, in light of there's been some community preservation rulings in the past that just restoring documents per se may not be CPA eligible. For example, if the town clerk's office wants to just digitize all their documents, it could be 20th century documents. If they're not of significance to the town or to the town's history from an archaeological standpoint, that's really just shifting the burden of the town over to CPA, and that's not the intent. What we're anticipating, or what we'll see from Town Council, is that the Ridgewood itself is a National Historic Landmark. It's a national, on the National Historic Register, and these are a part of Ridgewood, where they have a little bit more historical significance, given that this was laid out before the town was even incorporated. There is a lot of history here, so it could be that some of the documents are eligible and some are not, but we're hoping to get some more clarification from Town Council on that.
When you say the money was sidetracked, does that mean it was appropriated and not spent?
It was appropriated and not spent initially. It predates my time, so I'm not exactly sure what happened with it, but the project was funded, closed out, and now they're back to re-tackle this project. There were
Okay.
other priorities, so. Next, the Ridgewood Cemetery Association late last year acquired the property at 419 Johnson Street. This is, I believe, roughly a 5 acre parcel, kind of tucked back off Johnson Street. You almost wouldn't even know it was there. It's surrounded by homes, but it's a nice little field area, which has a home on it as well as a historic barn. This barn has been deemed of historic significance by the Historical Commission, which is a requirement of CPC. Ridgewood's initial intent in acquiring this is hopefully for future use for the cemetery, but that would be decades down the road, right? So it's kind of prudent planning for them. It's not adjacent to Ridgewood, but it's basically across the street. This would also give them the opportunity to house their caretaker on this property, which makes their caretaker job a more attractive position if they should ever have to replace their caretaker. And then for the barn, one of the thoughts they had would be to use it for equipment storage, right? They don't have a good equipment storage option right now at Ridgewood. And this would be dramatically less expensive than building a new one. One of the concerns the committee had is what does the actual public access look like as a part of this? So we're voting now to maintain the barn as a historic structure, but we're not exactly sure what the use is going to be down the road. So based on their initial request of $305,000, we were able to pare that down to $205,000 to be just the amount that would be needed to save the structure. The roof has holes in it. There's shoring that is failing. That would buy us time in order to preserve the structure and make sure that it remains intact, so that we could figure out what the future use would be for that. I'm sensing a question.
Yeah, it's just another one's like, I don't know how this, I'm trying to imagine how this benefits the general public and we're fixing up a barn so, they can have storage.
Well, we don't know what the final use will end up being.
Well, there you go. And
Right. Right.
That is exactly my point. Like, what is the final use going to be? And, there are tours. It's an old building of historical significance. Not all buildings can be preserved, unfortunately.
Fair.
But so this one has a lot more questions as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Chris?
Yeah?
Sorry,
Yes.
I was just wondering if I could ask a question. It's Regina. Maybe I'm remiss in not knowing this, but is Ridgewood Cemetery, like the owners, is that privately owned?
Yes.
Is that a nonprofit?
They're
Private
private.
nonprofit. But yes,
Okay.
private. Yes. So they acquired this acreage.
Correct.
And on it was a barn. And they're like, hey, maybe we can get CPA funds to restore the barn. That's very, very simplistic. And, that might not be entirely accurate, but that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not trying to be unkind.
no, I think it's fair. I mean, their intention, as described to us by the board, was, is to acquire the property
Yeah,
that they'll need hopefully 50, 60 years down the road, right? Not today. They're not going to be doing internments there anytime soon.
right. So, but I mean, so as far as the use for the cemetery, they're talking way
Way down the road.
down the road.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, they bought the land, and if they don't get this money, they're gonna do what? The barn will just
Yeah.
lost probably, or they'll figure out some other funding to preserve the barn. But they
Correct.
want the land anyway, regardless of the barn.
The
Yes.
land is already acquired. They own the fee. They bought it in December of '22. So
Okay.
they have that. They'll spend the money. The original application had a lot more in this when it first came to us for hedges and landscaping and other things. I said, well, wait a second. Let's focus on the historic nature of this. Right? You acquired this land. We can't fix it all up, but to the extent that there's the value historically to the barn, let's shore it up, and then we can figure out what the future use is down the road.
Because it's a lot of, that's a lot.
Now that you can hear me, can I ask another question I was trying to ask during the library
Yeah.
portion, and I wasn't.
Yep.
Oh, I'm
getting
sorry,
it.
Regina. I should be looking more over there. I'll try to pay more attention. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Back on the library one really quickly. At one point, I feel like there was some assessment being done or trying to figure out if we could make more parking spots at the library, and maybe it was sort of eliminating some of the green space, which I hate to see happen, but there is not a lot of parking for the library. Is that still being considered? Does anyone know? I mean, would this be? I guess my question is, if we spend the money on stairs now, are we going to disrupt that later if we, reconfigure that front area to have more parking?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm looking over my shoulder at one of the trustees.
Well, if you want to respond to that, Stan, I don't have any problem, but you'll have to go to a microphone
Yeah.
and tell us who you
Thanks,
are
Stan.
and why you know about this.
This is the funny story where you can tell where the Wi-Fi signal at the library cuts out, where people stop parking to steal the Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Stan Lippert, 43 Stonecliff Road. I'm also a trustee of the Stevens Memorial Library. Regina, we still have that on our list of things to do. It's not part of this, but we have
Right.
some separate work that we're trying to do to look at other parking options, like diagonal parking on the park side, for example. So we're still doing that, or even cut-in parking on Main Street. Moving the sidewalk and doing some other things. So we are looking at that. We know it's always a problem, so, it's on our list.
But we feel confident if we spend money to do these stairs.
This will have
we're not gonna
zero
mess that up
impact.
later.
No, this is totally unrelated to that, right? You know where this is, so any parking would be done way to the left or on the complete other side of the building.
Yeah,
So this has
okay.
nothing to do with that.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you.
That's why Stan attends.
Yep.
Thank you, Stan. Where did we leave ours? So we're still on 419 Johnson. So I think that
It just gives.
the comments are well received.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But any other questions on 419 Johnson?
Nope.
Okay,
Onward, my friend.
onward. The last application from Ridgewood, they did receive, we did give us another application, which they subsequently withdrew, which I'm not addressing tonight, was for $275,000 for the restoration of boundary walls along the southeastern portion of the cemetery. You can see a couple of the images, which Tim happened to take when he was out there. Over the years, this was news to me, the walls have been pilfered by landscapers or others looking to acquire stones. It's a shame. It's something I was not aware of, but these walls that were once 2.5, 3, even 4 feet high have been kind of raided over the years slowly. So wall footings are still in place. They would like to reestablish these walls. So there was some discussion in the committee. This was not a unanimous vote, but they did take favorable action, whether or not this was a recreation or restoration. Town council is looking at this one pretty closely, but based on the description from Mr. Pellich at Ridgewood, in the manner in which you're constructing these walls, you would not be redoing footings, not redoing foundations. You're building on top of what already exists. The committee felt that it was a restoration. They were comfortable with that.
So Okay, so I could see over the years that, yeah, they would disappear because anybody who lives anywhere near there who, yeah, I could totally see that, whether it was malicious or not, or, I mean, I doubt if it was, but yeah, because they're in the middle of the woods, you get these walls. So if they're going to restore it, are they going to be carrying ancient rocks over? I mean, are we paying for,
Aren't all rocks historic in some way?
you know, okay.
No, I mean, they would not be. And not all walls are created equal, right? I mean,
Right.
there are certain walls throughout town that you can see that were there from, the days of the pilgrims.
So
These are
it's
some
not
of the-
like it would be back to what it was.
The idea would be a close replica of that. Yes, I mean, it won't be exactly the same, but I think it would match the existing wall projects they've done elsewhere throughout the cemetery. One of the questions we had was, all right, well, how do you do these and make sure that they don't end up in the next subdivision? And it would be through use of interior mortar and other things that make it a lot more difficult to walk away with these.
Electrified stones.
I know.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of fake stones.
Does the boundary serve a purpose other than just that it was something old that, much of New England has old stone walls trailing through it?
From a pure purpose standpoint, it's really at this point an aesthetic.
Okay.
If they're, and you can see this in different parts of the cemetery, where if they're looking to really, shield a neighbor, privacy, they planted arborvitaes.
Yeah.
Which are, I mean, some of them are 30, 40 feet high at this point, to shield and add screening to the cemetery. This is purely for an aesthetic, which you can see, beautiful walls really throughout the cemetery.
Yeah. No, again, I'm having a little difficulty with this one
Understood.
too. So.
Walls
I don't know how
walls
anybody
are
else-
expensive.
Yeah, it's just a lot of money to, yeah,
Really fair.
to.
Where is the location of these walls? Are they visible from like the street or?
They are
is it
not.
going- Backing up to someone's backyard?
It butts up to a butter. So the top picture there is really both those pictures are really kind of representative of the location. You're really only going to be able to see these with maybe a couple of small exceptions. You might be able to catch a glimpse of it from Marble Ridge, but primarily this will be viewed from within the cemetery. Is that what you're asking, Regina?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Next up, the town manager's office came to us for $150,000 for the Stevens Estate stables. This building is in need of some urgent repair. This is to stabilize the project and stabilize the house. A future use is not known. Right now, it's actually storing excess school equipment, desks and chairs and whatnot. The goal would be obviously for a public use for this, not necessarily by fireside catering. One of the things that the town manager's office anticipated was either Mass Audubon using this for learning. Maybe the school department would be able to use this for some off-site activities or meetings. But this is to basically keep the building from falling down right now, so we can buy us some time to figure out what that longer-term use would be.
Okay.
I believe this one's come up a couple of times before, because it's
Yeah,
always kind of been.
this has been an issue for the stables for a very long time.
Yeah. I think as one of our members said, that he's done talking about the stables. So, next up is the Affordable Housing Trust grant, which I referenced at the outset of this presentation. The AHT, as you may or may not know, is almost exclusively funded through community preservation grants. They do have access to funding through the new inclusionary zoning bylaw, but no projects have been approved or built that would fund that. So right now, all of their money comes from the Community Preservation Committee. And this is the only affordable housing application we received this year. So either way, we're going to have to set aside 10% of the allocation. So the committee agreed to give the 10% to AHT, not in a precedent-setting manner. They didn't want to say this is automatic, that you're going to get the 10% every year. One of the things that's good about the AHT is they don't have to wait for town meeting to take action. A property comes on the market that they need to act on. If they've got the money, they get the reserves, they can go ahead and put that in place. When COVID hit, they were very vital in providing rental assistance program to folks. They've started a new first-time home buyer down payment assistance program, which some dollars could particularly go to. So I think the committee overall, as we noted at the outset, we've need to fund more towards affordable housing, frankly.
That was right, my question. Can you do more than this?
We could. I think the committee's a little bit reluctant to without a specific project identified, which is in itself a bit of a paradox, right? Because you want to fund the Affordable Housing Trust because when the project comes up, you may not know about it at this time, but you want to
Right.
at least have the fund built up. So we always could, but in the past, they've asked for $100,000. This was already a large increase
Yep.
from what they've had in the
Okay.
past. So,
Thank you.
yep. Next, Planning Conservation Department came to us for an open space acquisition of property at 0 Bradford Street. If any of you are familiar with Bradford Street, this is a parcel that's currently openly being marketed. There's a sign on it now that sits in the middle of two large, currently protected parcels of land. So for the committee, this was critical to plug that gap and have a contiguous piece of protected land. This is between Carter Hill and Mazarenko Farm, for those of you who are familiar with it. The $515,000 represents the appraised value. It has been appraised. As you know, we can't spend more than that, or we have a little bit of leeway, but we can't pay $1 million, for example, for this. So they have been in negotiations with the seller. Part of the discussion is what is really buildable on the lot, and that's really what drives the appraisal. So committee voted favorable action. This is really our only open space acquisition for the year. One of the things that we definitely heard at the outset of the year in some of our public comment was do more for open space. So we'd love to see this one come together.
Okay.
How big is it?
6.8 acres, I believe. Good portion of it is wet. Next up is a reference at the outset, an application which we did not take action on. This one came to us from Black Swan Realty Trust. They are the owners of a commercial building on Sutton Street, and that parcel also includes the body of water known as Sutton Pond. You can see in the image there some wood pilings. That's the old Dizzy Bridge, for those of you who may have been in town long enough to know that. It was where the railroad easement crossed over Sutton Pond from the mills right back down to Main Street. The pond is created by a dam at the northern end of Sutton Pond. It's an earthen dam with a number of trees over it and an adjacent masonry spillway. The Office of Dam Safety has come to the applicant and said, you've got a failing dam, it's rated poor, and you do some work. Which the applicant could do. They could simply remove the spillway or remove the dam, and the water level would dissipate and result in something similar to what the Kitchikwick River is. If you're familiar with the stretch kind of behind the high school, behind the baseball field, that's what this would result in if the water were to flow all the way out to the Merrimack. The committee took no action on this. There was a vote, but no resolution was made. There are still a lot of questions on this application in terms of both applicability and what the final project would be. There has been, obviously, as I think folks are aware, there's a current rail trail project that is being worked on, which if you've ever done a rail trail, they take a lot of time to negotiate all appropriate easements. One possible path for that rail trail would be to cross over the bridge to recreate the bridge. And as such have a nice water feature as the culminating part of that rail trail. Other options may include trails around Sutton Pond. And if you look in the master plan, Sutton Pond is called out as a potential recreation area for a revitalization effort for downtown. So the arguments in favor are do something to protect the water level and figure it out later. The arguments opposed are there's a lot of questions that are still open regarding this particular project. So ultimately, the committee took no action.
So the money would just be spent on the survey?
The money would be spent on the hydrology survey for this dam, the water, and then further dams subsequent upstream all the way back to Lake Kitchikwick. There is anticipation that if we were to rebuild the bridge, we'd have to do this study anyway. The question becomes, if we do that now and we're not ready for the bridge for 5 years, is the study even still valid at that
But I
point?
mean, this is privately owned property.
Correct. It is privately owned property. And I mean, and what I would say is the property owner is under no obligation to maintain the water level.
Yeah.
Right? If it were solely about dollars and there's nothing else, they could simply remove the spillway and the water disappears and their headache goes away, which is probably, frankly, what the Office of Dam Safety would prefer. They'd probably not have to want to monitor these dams and their and potential public safety impact that they have.
They could also donate the land.
That's a little trickier for them with regards to subdivision for zoning and lease rights of their existing tenant. It gets a little bit into the weeds there, but that we did ask that question, and that was not an option for them. And then the question becomes, does the town want to assume the liability of the dam?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see why you would just,
So there's a lot of
it's a lot
questions
to
on this.
unparse in a short period of time.
Correct.
Okay.
So again, committee did take no action, so. Next, we received an application from the town manager for $50,000. This is one that has come to us before, came to us about 3 years ago, to restore the historic David Neal painting in the Stevens estate. There was a lot of discussion around the value of the painting and why are we spending $50,000 on something that may be selling for as little as $5,000 in other places. And the appraisal at the time of the application had not yet been completed for this particular painting. So the idea was, unlike the stables, this is not going to fall down, right?
Yeah.
We can have a little bit more time to make sure that we get the appraisal and more work is done, and hopefully get it looked at a future application. So.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yep. And lastly, we received an application from the Trinitarian Church. This one was fraught for many reasons. Number one being that the money's already been spent. So last year they had a ceiling issue. The ceiling in their sanctuary was starting to fall. A very similar church in Ipswich actually did have their ceiling collapse. Fortunately, no one was injured, but had that happened here, and I spoke with the church leaders, they likely would have had to sell the church in order to cover the costs. Here they did some private fundraising. They took out a loan. They even received an anonymous donor for $30,000 to restore the ceiling and make it safe again. From a CPC perspective, this presents a few challenges for us. While the law doesn't prevent us from allocating funds for projects where the money's already been spent, it's not typically good practice to do so for a few reasons. You lose some control over it, and there's always a question of, well, if they could fund it on their own, why are we funding it with CPC dollars? That's problem one, and something I think future committees will take up and establish a policy on that. Number two, it's an interior restoration of a historic building, and while it is, ostensibly open to the public, it is still a church that is not open to the public at any time. And the committee in the past has had issues, the Stevens Coolidge project notwithstanding, with interior renovations for buildings that may not have public access. And lastly, if this committee recalls, we received an application a few years ago from St. Paul's Church for similar exterior renovations. And this is where we run into some challenges with regard to the anti-aid amendment for religious institutions, or technically for private institutions as well. In order to fund a religious institution, there's a three-part test that, quite frankly, is threading a needle. And this was a 2018 decision from the town of Acton when they were sued by a group of taxpayers for funding stained glass window restoration in a church. The committee from again, from the St. Paul's application right through to here has said we're not going to go down that road based on the criteria that's been set out by the Massachusetts Supreme Court for what would be eligible. It's really, really hard to justify something that wouldn't be aiding a religious institution. So the committee voted on favorable action on this one.
Okay.
And that is everything I have for you this evening. I apologize for running so long, but I will happily take any other questions that you have.
Anybody have any questions? Nancy?
Now that we've heard all the details, could we see the slide again that just had the summary? So,
Sure.
like how much was on cemetery, how much was on affordable housing, and so on?
This
Thank
the one you want?
Yep, thanks. Actually, I can't see the amount column. on the view I have.
Which one can I give you? You want the total?
How about the total?
Well, I kind of wanted like the sums for like recreation,
Oh,
Here
here you go. How's this?
Okay, yes, thank you, that's what I want. And of the 62% that's historic preservation, sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? I
How
just
much,
wanted-
how much is going to
okay.
Ridgewood?
How much is on Ridgewood versus the others?
250, 455.
It's a lot.
Quick math there,
730?
30.
That's a significant percentage.
So that would be about half of the allocation for historic is going to Ridgewood.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
The beat goes on. Anyone else have any questions? Nothing?
That's good.
Okay, okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're
That
very
was
welcome.
a really a great and detailed presentation. Very much appreciated.
Thank you all for your time.
We'll be calling you up to ask all our other questions. Thank you,
you.
Brian. And I was happy to see, not happy to see your last meeting, but I was at the end, it was like, oh, it's Brian's last meeting.
I'm going to miss it.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss it. But
Well, you've done a great
I
job.
don't know if
Let's-
they'll miss me, but that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
for your service. We really appreciate it.
Very welcome.
All right, next up, these patient people who now know way more than they ever wanted to know about all the pretty little parts of North Andover, right? And this is our discussion with the school department budget with a superintendent and assistant superintendent. We have Dr. Gilligan here and Dr. Mealy.
Good evening, folks. How we doing?
We are doing great. How are you?
Thank you for having us tonight.
We're thrilled to have you anytime. Love to see you.
It's our annual visit. No snow this week.
No snow, I know. I know, it's like 50 degrees this afternoon. It's so strange. It's supposed to be really warm tomorrow.
Yeah, well, we got through last week, so that was good.
Oh, that's right. How you doing with snow days?
We're doing great.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. I think we've had two
Is that
two
it?
so far, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The last 3 years have been low on the snow. so.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Mealy's got the budget up, and
Presentation.
yeah.
There you go. All right.
And
You
so,
go.
thanks for having us. We're thrilled to be here tonight to present and talk about the FY24 budget. This year, it represents a 5.5% increase, which is vital to meeting the needs of all of our students, particularly those impacted by the pandemic. And although the grant era funding for the pandemic is largely ended, I mean, it has ended, the effects of the pandemic have not. And so we're pretty excited because the last 2 years, to add the positions we've had, really make a difference. So we're going to take you through the budget tonight, and we're going to take a look at the strategic plan and our budget directives, the annual budget timeline, recovery service funding summary, recovery services, the lessons we learned and the benefits, the FY24 budget pressure points, the FY24 budget goals, recovery services adjustments, FY24 additional considerations, and the FY24 superintendent's recommended budget and next steps. All right, so our strategic plan has not changed. We have three main objectives, and that's equity for all students, and that's ensuring all students are provided with equal access to an excellent education. A consistent and rigorous curriculum, so that the North Andover education is a North Andover education no matter where you go, what school you're in, and that we have the resources that encourages all students to learn to the depth and distance of their abilities, to leave our schools with the skills and knowledge necessary to succeed in college, career, and life. And last but not least, targeted professional practice, and that's to hire and develop excellent educators who utilize data, professional development, and collaboration to continually adapt their practice to meet the student needs. School committee budget directives, typically these come out in the early fall, and this is the budget directives this year would retain or add the necessary teaching positions to support the core teaching and learning mission of the district. Retain the FTEs identified as recovery services in the previous budget by providing funding in the operating budget. Maintain class size to meet our guidelines with no class exceeding 25 students. And our goal, these numbers actually changed. They are a little bit lower. We changed it 2 years ago. The guidelines prior to were much higher. It was 28 in grades 3 to 5.
How many classes do you think exceed the 25 students? Do you have any?
It's pretty remarkable this year. 5 years ago when I started, over 50% of our classes under the old guidelines were over the recommended guidelines.
Yeah.
And now we only have 6 classes in all of elementary, 6 total over the recommended guidelines.
Over 22?
And they're only one over.
They're only one over. It's 6 total classes in the district, which is almost like an effective zero
that's
for
impressive.
us. Yeah.
Yeah.
and secondary level, middle and high school class size to meet the programming needs. Align the budget with the strategic objectives, as we just mentioned what those were. Continue to provide our faculty with up-to-date instructional resources and professional development. I think that's a key one. The instructional resources, oftentimes districts will purchase instructional resources but don't scaffold it with the appropriate professional development. And we've seen that in other districts. Recommend and budget for programs and initiatives to improve progress of high-needs learners, ensure adequate progress for all students, including special education, the parent learning community, engagement, and exploration of summer and other programming. So we've had some really successful summer programming and during school vacation break this year, so pretty excited. All right, so I'm just going to take you a little back in time for a second. If you recall, take you through FY22. So if you go back a few years, at the time we were just assessing the impact of the pandemic, and I think that was the year we signed a moratorium and told that we got the first quarter results in from the taxes, so there was no hiring. We had a kind of a hiring freeze that year. But we did add positions to the high school in plans of adding a new high school schedule, which we've implemented in the last couple of years. So we added the high school positions, and we also looked at the recovery services. FY23, we used the current year, we used the operating and grant funds for recovery services. So back in '22, we added recovery positions through free cash, and then this current year, we added about half of the positions were funded through the operating budget with a 5.34% increase, and the other half we funded through grant funding, through ESSER funding, it's called. And so one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the years is grant funding can be a tough thing, right? It's terrific when it's there, but when it goes away, a lot of people fall off the cliff. And so we've worked really hard to have a sustainable budget that we can have. And so, last year it was about half and half. Half of the positions that we've added were covered, again, with the operating, the other half with grant. And for next year, the 5.5% increase represents putting all of the positions into the operating budget in perpetuity, which is a huge gain for the town of North Andover. It's, we've been able to do a lot in the last 2 years that we hadn't been able to do for many, many years.
So you think that all the positions that you put in under the grant funds are able to be covered?
They are.
Okay.
Yep, and then as we go forward, so we'll transition. We talked about transitioning even this year for FY24. Some of those positions may go away by position based on need as we put positions in from our long-term plan. So we've had a long-term staffing plan for some time now, and so we've been really thoughtful about what we need for the pandemic and recovery, and then what's in the long term. And many of the positions overlap. So the good news is, a big chunk of those positions are already in the long-term plan as needed. And then as we go forward, it's really going to depend for FY25, the first school project. So we'll add positions with increased capacity. Right. So as we break ground this summer, hopefully, on the 26,000 square foot middle school addition, which is needed, we will have the funding in place to add the teachers into those spaces that can really make a difference. And then FY26 and 27, we'll look to maintain level services between the projects and then add positions as we have the building projects as part of Facilities Master Plan 2.
Just before we move off of this one is a really important slide to understand. A few years ago, we had two big initiatives going on. One was that we wanted to impact class size, but we just didn't have the space to do it. And so you've seen as part of Facilities Master Plan 2, the plan for adding space going forward. At the same time, we identified a lot of student services that weren't being met that we needed to, and we put together a long-term 5-year plan to add those positions in. Ironically, COVID sped up that process because it made funds available sooner than they would have been through the operating budget. And so even though, as Dr. Gilligan said, we had started this in FY21, we had a nice infusion that helped us add some positions. The same thing was going to happen in FY22, but we kind of had to back off to see what impact COVID was going to have on revenues and budgets. Turned out we were okay. So FY23, we got recovery services money, we got ESSER money, and so those positions have been here for the last few years that wouldn't have been through just the operating budget. But in the last couple of years now, last year and this year, 5.34% last year budget increase, and 5.5% gets us to where we were going to be with regards to recovery or student services, student support type positions. And now going forward, after next year, it's maintained during those years when no new space is coming online. We're at level services, and then if a project is coming online, you're going to see the addition in conversations with the town manager. She's got those planned already for additional positions to put into the space that we've now created.
Can you gentlemen tell me, you referenced recovery services a couple of times, and you'll have to forgive me, but I don't know what recovery services are.
So it's so you've got some different sources of revenue, or not revenue, but funding that came in during the pandemic. ESSER 1, 2, and 3 was money from the state that helped us with materials, positions. The town, through free cash, probably, right, Lynn, for recovery services?
Particularly the first year.
And ARPA was able to provide us with what we called recovery services funding, but it was coming from the town.
Okay. And so you're able to maintain that budgetary level
Correct.
through your...
As Dr. Gilligan was talking about with grants, sometimes it's difficult. So we were able to do it. So the money coming in let us fund those positions while we were increasing the budget, so that when the money went away,
You still had...
the budget was there.
Your level, okay, got it.
Yep.
The FY20.
Were you asking what the recovery services themselves were, like reading specialists, social emotional learning,
Yeah.
you know, administrator,
All kinds of
whatever,
things.
like,
Yeah,
Right, so
we're going to show you.
we do have those in a slide
Yep.
later in the presentation.
You know, just
Okay.
a quick example. I mean, you know, a lot of districts didn't necessarily make the investments like in mental health. We know that was a challenge. So we added 4 counselors across the district, a couple school psychologists. We knew that was.
sorry, Dr. Gilligan, could you adjust your microphone? I can't hear anything anymore. I don't know if it got like pushed away or something.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Thank you, yes.
Okay. Not usually, no one usually says they can't hear me. Anyway, you know, so we know, you know, like counselors were necessary, but they were also part of our long-term plan as well. So the ability to do both makes a difference. Interventionist, exactly. We had a 4.5 reading specialist at the elementary, 2 math specialists. And we have a couple slides with that, so I don't want to give away the whole story. I can sometimes do that. All right. Dr. Mealy, want to take us through recovery service funding summary?
So this is actually what we were just talking about, where we got $2 million in recovery services money from the town. ESSER 2, we used $816,000 in the FY22 budget, and $600,000 of ESSER 3. And then in the FY23, this current year, those additional positions and continuing to get materials and supplies, we're using most of the rest of the ESSER 3 funding. We should have about $200,000 left for FY24. And then after that, all the money is used and we're into the just operating budget. And this is just a visual. Some people like to see the graphic. The blue, while not, you know, it's not the real percentage in the picture. That's the operating budget of $54 million in FY22. You can see recovery services and ESSER funding made up the rest of our funding for that year. FY23, it's the operating budget and ESSER, and then FY24 and on, it'll be just the operating budget.
Just for the folks at home, Jim, the first column, the smallest column, that's FY22. FY23 is the middle, and FY24 is the last one.
Can I make a comment? You know, a lot of communities are struggling with the recovery funds, ESSER, especially the ESSER funds, and looking at fiscal cliffs, because they spent or they used the ESSER funds for operating budgets without planning the end of that. There was an article, I think, in the Globe a day or two ago that went into this in some detail. So, I mean, I love this plan. I think you guys have done a tremendous job navigating through some pretty treacherous waters the last few years, and through planning and understanding of you know, things of the difference between operational costs and one-time sources of revenue, you know, and such. You've been able to work your way through it. So I'm extremely impressed with this. And
It's a lot of
Because it's
teamwork,
back in
you know,
view.
it's not just us,
Yes.
it's working with our committee and working with the select board and working with,
Yeah.
the town manager and I
Right,
meet every
right.
Tuesday, so
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
that
good
relationship's
partnership. Yeah.
very important.
Excellent.
All right, pressure points. So there are pressure points. You know, Dr. Mealy, you want to take the first four?
Okay. So what we did with this slide is just identify this coming year, what are our budget pressure points? Our 403B match, we continue to see an increase in participation. It's a contractual obligation that we have for our teachers that if they put up $250, we'll match that. And we're seeing that grow in anticipation, in participation. It's not a huge number, but it's gone from 30,000 to 60,000 over the last 3 or 4 years. Contracted services, supplies, materials, this is not going to surprise anyone. We're seeing it this year. We've been in conversations with the town manager. We're especially seeing this with regards to maintenance. We've had a lot of things happen to our HVAC equipment this year, but the repairs, whether it's waiting forever for the parts or the cost to repair, have really gone up a lot as a result of, we guess, from COVID and delivery times and things like that. But yeah, that's had a big impact, and we expect to continue to see that. Utility costs have increased. In salaries, we're in contract negotiations right now with the teachers, the teaching assistants, and the administrative assistants this year, and we anticipate hearing from them as well about inflation and the impact it's having on them, and how that should impact their salaries going forward.
The extended school year services, those are special education services we provide outside of the school year. You know, one example of this is we've had increased participation in need. You know, I think one example would be our partnership with the Youth Center and Rick Gorman, and we have an MOU with them to share information, and we put some of our staff on staff there, and we also train their staff so that we can have increased participation, and rather than some kids maybe participating in a program outside of town, they get to be with their peers, and we get to provide some of those. So we've had an increase in that extended school year services. Dr. Mealy, you want to talk about transportation and out of district?
It's interesting that a lot of people are going out to bid this year. It's, I guess, the cycle, or we're all in the same cycle. But we did, and we just got our bids in. We anticipated getting one. We got one qualified bidder, and we anticipated an increase because they're seeing fuel cost increases and labor cost increases. Pleasantly surprisingly, it wasn't as much as we thought it was going to be. It's probably about a 6% increase instead of a 10% increase, but still significant, and so we had to account for that. And then the out-of-district tuitions, the OSD, Operational Services Division, is allowing a 14% increase in tuitions for private schools. So that's where we send our students, our out-of-district students, to both public and collaborative schools. But the private schools are going to be able to increase by 14%. We didn't really try to account for that because the state is working on ways to mitigate the impact this coming year. For one, Chapter 70 is going up. The proposed number right now is about 1.2 million more than we budgeted for Chapter 70. So that would be great if that's the final budget that is approved by the governor or by the legislature. And there are also Circuit breaker, thank you. Circuit breaker is a reimbursement we get from the state for costs for students that exceed a certain amount. It's about $51,000. Anything we pay for a student over that gets reimbursed the following year, up to 75%. So they're trying to manage some ways that they might be able to increase circuit breaker reimbursements to help mitigate that impact as well.
And circuit breaker funding. This microphone's a little funky
What
here.
is the trend for out-of-district placements? I know at one point we were kind of trying to bring more people back into district. Are we kind of trending where more people are coming back in, or more kids are going out, or what's?
There's a lot of, Regina, that's a great question. So it's lower than it had been previously. You know, off the top of my head, and I don't have it right in front of me, I want to say it's 60 or 62 students. It had been higher, but there are different things that contribute to out-of-district placement. Sometimes it's based on the need or the disability. Sometimes it's about groupings and having, not enough of a peer group. Sometimes it's about age and how many kids are a particular age and following the law that way. So, but we have, Regina, put a lot of effort into professional development and staffing to build capacity within North Andover. There's nothing more important to me as superintendent than having North Andover kids go to school in North Andover if we can service them and provide free and appropriate public education. That's critical. It's best for everybody, rather than someone having to necessarily get on a bus and travel long distances. Sometimes there are real specialized needs that we have to do that in cases, and that's why special education is the individualized education plan. So it really depends on the student. So.
One follow-up question to that. Out of the 62 or so students that are out of district right now, are the majority going to other public schools, or is there?
No.
Okay.
No, they're going to private
Got it.
or collaborative schools.
Yeah.
Yeah. It actually, we used to average about between 60 and 65 students that were out of district. And we did have an effort over the last few years to put in programs to allow us to bring students back into district. We've been averaging over the last 2 or 3 years now closer to 50 students out of district, and our out of district tuition costs have gone from between $5.5 and $6 million to 4.5, 4.8. Probably been averaging about 4.8. So it's been significant.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a good example, just to give you a good example, we're responsible for some students with individualized education plans up to age 22. So from 18 to 22, we didn't have any programming a while back. And so those students would be a significant cost. Well, we partnered with Andover to create the TOPS program. It's housed over at the Andover Youth Center and part of their Punchett High School. And, there is a cost to getting it up and running, but the amount of kids that go to TOPS, it's a huge savings for North Andover and Andover, and our students in the communities in which they live, and have the ability then to do things with partnerships with businesses in downtown Andover. And eventually, we're down the road, we'd like to have some space here in North Andover too, as that program grows. So that's an example of spending money to create a program that actually saves money in the long run, and it's best for
That's
kids.
great.
We get a lot of positive feedback on the program, and it's no exaggeration to say it saves probably about $1 million a year.
In savings.
The out-of-district that has never changed as to being, a pressure point, a hot point budget. It just is. I mean, I was sat on the committee a long time ago, and that was the same thing that we agonized over every year. So,
Overall enrollment throughout the system, is that stable, increasing, decreasing?
I think we're at 4609 total. I think the state would show us the less, but they're not necessarily including the out-of-district students.
Okay.
So it's about 4,600. So, we are down a few students from where we were. The ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's about the birth rate. Like the high school class a couple of years ago had a bigger graduating class than Haverhill High School with 402 students. And then the next year, I think it was like 307. There's different pressure points on grades. But in the last decade, Jim's is our enrollment. He is our enrollment. He does all the projections for us, along with, we've had some companies do it. I'd say we're probably down about, Jim, a little over 100 students from maybe.
Yeah, so it's all relative, right? The state, over the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic, is down on an average of 4% in enrollment. We've been down over the same period of time about 2%.
And so some of it might be birth rate, some of it may be, we had double the homeschool students during the pandemic. Now, it's not a ton, right? We went from 25 to 50, but it's still another 25 students, so we're pretty confident, in facilities master plan too, and we think the projections of about 30 students a year across the entire district, all grade levels, over the next decade, would expect to see about 300 more students 10 years from now.
Next slide.
Next slide. All right, so the budget goals, that's what we were on, Dr. Mealy, the budget goals. Operating budget increase to complete the transition from recovery services to the operating fund. We talked about that. adjust to the changing needs associated with post-pandemic student needs, continue to pursue enrichment, equity, and assessment opportunities, and continue to identify and address student needs. All right. Dr. Mealy.
Dr. Gilligan mentioned that we were looking at a 5.5% increase for this year. That brings all of those positions into the operating budget. You can see these are the categories we use every year, district-wide, elementary, high school, middle school, maintenance, special education, technology, and transportation, and the individual increases in those for different reasons. Transportation, we just talked about, why that one's going up. Technology, we're in pretty good shape on technology, so and there's not a lot of positions in there, so you don't see a big jump there. And the other ones are pretty much in the same ballpark. But that's just a breakdown of the budget increase that we're looking at for this year.
And just to be clear, your pressure points are captured here in your 5.5% increase.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, so lessons learned from recovery services. No surprise, right? You pick up the paper any day of the week. The increase of mental health and social emotional learning services among students and staff. I mean, clearly the pandemic there was a disruption of routines. There was feelings of isolation. I mean, it's not just students; it's families who have been impacted. Really significant. A need to address academic achievement and unfinished learning due to the interrupted learning. I think the positive part for us is we've put some really strong intervention programs in place that, and programming and staffing, so it hasn't been just one thing. In North Andover, the trends mirror what we see in Massachusetts and beyond, but our trends are slightly higher, and we think we've made a real impact, particularly in our younger grades. And this year at school committee, we had our curriculum team come in, our literacy specialists come in and talk about the progress on our standardized testing, whether it be DIBELS or MAP testing. And we saw on the MCAS, which is a tough thing to look at this year, right? Like, for example, the 10th graders haven't taken the MCAS since 7th grade.
Lucky
so
them.
yeah, and it's just a snapshot in time. So, no commentary on MCAS, but, we saw every single school go up, and some of them significantly in terms of accountability data, which is what they use to judge schools. Now, we didn't get a status from the state because that was reserved more for schools that were struggling, districts that were struggling, and so they'll be looking at setting a new baseline with last year. But in that, they do a percentile rank versus every other elementary school in the state, every middle school in the state, and every high school in the state. And all of our schools went up, and some of them significantly. So really impressive work. And then last but not least, a need for increased and consistent use of assessment to provide data on student achievement due to the interrupted learning. So, we've increased some of our testing, whether it be formative testing or summative testing, and we've increased, for example, our MAP testing across, grades 1 through 8. So that really gives teachers in our data meetings and our collaboration meetings information about students, and it informs instruction. So we have information about how the class is doing or how our students doing. We can take action to have a lesson plan or prescribe an intervention, and then we'll progress monitor that, and then we'll revisit it as a team and look at how we're doing. So those were things we clearly learned. Also, the need for additional professional development due to additional pandemic-based social, emotional, and academic needs. I mean, some of our students, particularly a lot of our younger students who had been in grade 1, or they had been in kindergarten, or they had been to a preschool that haven't been there, being home for some time, and some of the challenges related to body regulation, self-regulation. It's taken a little longer for some of those pieces, and it's impacted more students. What I'd say is, all of these things existed pre-pandemic, but certainly we've seen a rise in those numbers, and the pandemic exacerbated some of those needs. And then last but not least, the work we do to continue to address equity gaps due to the increase of the pandemic. We know that students have been disproportionately impacted with the pandemic across the United States, depending on socioeconomic status. We've seen students of color struggle, English language learners, students in special education. So this is work that we do ongoing. We've partnered with Boston College. They work with us in Lawrence, Mass. And they're out, and our principals look at this data all the time, and how do we use that to inform our instruction as well. And then the recovery service benefits. The biggest thing I'd say is the money we've spent has been well spent. We know that it's made a difference in terms of social and emotional support, in terms of staffing, additional assessment tools, diverse professional development offerings, and coaching support. And I'd say that, like, Lorene Marks, is our assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, has done a remarkable job with that piece, because oftentimes in districts, if it's elementary, in us too, years and years ago, it would be math PD for all elementary. It didn't matter if you taught music, if you taught art, whatever you taught. And, to have the ability, just like we teach kids, to have more diversity in those offerings and to offer appropriate support, because everyone could be at different levels and have different needs. So that's been great. And then support for our highest need students to ensure equity and access to an excellent education. All right. So, Dr. Mealy, do you want to take us through this?
So these are the positions that Regina was asking for earlier, for us to explain what are we talking about. So these are positions that are here this year, and we're going to be allowed to be able to continue with going forward because they're now in the operating budget. It includes additional custodians, register and parent liaisons. 2 positions have been. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is my favorite one. I wanted to add 1 parent liaison, and then I was like, we're adding 2 with the pandemic. They've been amazing. We were able to hire 2 bilingual parent liaison. One was Portuguese, one in Spanish, and those are Spanish is the highest, most spoken language, and then the Portuguese, particularly Brazilian Portuguese. So they have been remarkable. They were originally in our office, but now we have them out at 2 schools stationed as their home base. And the work that they do for us translating, the work that they do for us for meetings, for outreach, I mean, it's really, it's important. We know it's important. We have programming, and we know we have to go out to the community for people who have needs. And so they've done a great job, and they're probably the best 2 positions we've added. I mean, unbelievable.
That's what I was going to say.
Not to take anything away from the other positions.
And so you can see the other positions, the support positions are the ones on the next slide. But on the right, in bold, those are the ones when we were talking earlier about as projects come online and space becomes available, those are the positions that then get added when the space is available. And then here you can see.
Can I just ask you guys to read the positions on the left, because my view is cut off and I can't really see it all.
So yes, on the first slide you have additional teachers that have been added, 3 elementary. We've got 2 high school teachers that were added, and 2 special education teachers and 2 EL teachers. So these
So the first column, it says principal, special education director, parent liaison, then what's below that?
So you have elementary teachers, elementary specialists, high school teachers, middle school teachers, special education teachers, and EL teachers.
Sorry, that was too fast. Elementary teachers, elementary specialists, high school teachers, high school.
Then middle school.
Middle school.
I can share this presentation with you.
Well, just parent liaison, elementary teachers, elementary specialists, middle school teachers, high school teachers.
Yep, and then special education teachers and EL teachers.
Middle school teachers, high school teachers, special ed teachers, and then ESL.
EL teachers, yep.
Okay. All right. Oh, EL. Okay. So there's no social emotional learning.
So the next slide, we see we have a psychologist, we have 2 ETLs, we have a K-8 math director.
For the folks at home, or, sometimes we have a lot of acronyms. So ETL stands for Evaluation Team Leader. That's a special education position.
Okay.
And we have 3 adjustment counselors, 4.5 reading interventionists, a media specialist, which is actually a librarian/media specialist, 2 math interventionists, and 5 coaching positions, which is going down to 4 coaching positions.
Sorry, are you guys going to send us this because I can't read?
Yeah, I'll share it. I did share it with Jillian, but I'll share it with the members right after the meeting.
It's in the agenda.
Okay, great.
The agenda, if you get to it.
So sorry, could you go back to the previous slide? Sorry if I'm interrupting here, but so the 1.5 principal, one of the questions I had was, are we going to fund making the Atkinson, we have a part-time assistant principal, right, at Atkinson, shared with another school?
Yeah, we only have we only have a 1.0 FTE, assistant principal, for all of elementary. So, when we first put the position in, it was at the Franklin and the Sergeant. And back in 21 or 22, when we didn't add additional funds, I made the decision based on what was best for the district, we moved it from Franklin over to Atkinson, and they have that split. So in our long-term plan, our goal is to add a half-time assistant principal at all the elementary schools in the long-term plan. So,
But that's not represented here. So like, certainly in FY '24, we're not making that a full-time position, it looks like.
no, with a lot of work on the budget with principals, we talked about transitioning as part of our plan from the recovery services. Some of those positions may transition into the longer-term plan positions, but it was really clear that what we have, we still need. And there's been some slight tweaks this year, like going from the 5 coaches to the 4 allows us to add an additional elementary librarian. So we think that's really important. But Regina, I think the easiest way to say it is over the last 2 years, in going forward, the operating budget will now cover classroom teachers, special educators, English learner teachers, reading and math interventionists, coaches, both in literacy and math, 2 bilingual parent liaisons, custodians, social workers and counselors, a school psychologist, and the library media specialist. All right, Dr. Mealy, I'm going to keep you going with the spreadsheets here.
So this just lays out how this is a 5.5% increase. Level services usually and consistently has been about 3% from one year to the next to maintain what we have and carry it forward. As we're seeing an increase in that as a result of inflation and other reasons. So level services this year, going into next year, is 3.68%. And then those recovery services positions coming into the budget is another 1.82% increase on the budget for the 5.5%. So the total budget request is $60,364,146.
All right.
This is Nancy. Oh, sorry, this is Nancy. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Sure.
please do.
So I first of all, I think 5.5% is not unreasonable at all, especially considering the inflationary environment, and I don't think it will be controversial for town meeting. But so I don't want to make it sound like I'm questioning that. I'm not, but I do have a question. The recovery services are recovery from COVID disruptions, and like over time, do you ever envision those services no longer being needed, or what's the longer term picture, or are they basically going to be needed indefinitely, for other reasons? Or
Yeah, I wish I had a whiteboard to show you my Venn diagram, but many of the recovery services positions were positions, many of them, a big chunk of them were a part of our long-term staffing plan. So the overlap is incredible. I mean, we've had a need for additional reading interventionists. We've had a need for math interventionists. We've had a need for counselors. These were in our plan, and the recovery services allowed us to expedite that plan. We will look at making tweaks as we go, and some of the positions that currently exist may transition into a portion of the long-term staffing plan that that we want to get to as we don't need a few of the positions moving forward. But most of them were already in our long-term plan.
okay, yeah, and I think it's fair to say that it's probably going to be a long time before children and students, recover from the huge disruption. So I don't think there's any question that it's all still needed. I was just wondering kind of what the longer term plan was. But thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add that it's a great question because it gets to the heart of the matter here in that the amount now in our budget covers what we had planned for, as Dr. Gilligan said, our support services positions, but obviously the needs have changed because of COVID. And so we have more coaches and interventionists on staff right now, and will for a while. But then as time goes on, you'll see those to start to change to counselors or other support service positions based on student needs, but they're in the budget. And so while we're dealing with the fallout from COVID, we're in a position that we can deal with it and then adjust as we go.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, next steps. Well, we already had the recommended budget January 12th. The public hearing was on the 19th of January. The school committee adopted the budget on February 2nd. And it's already been, we're here with you guys tonight. The select board, I think, was a couple weeks ago. But at the end of the day, the final budget adoption will be at town meeting on May 16th.
Yep, sounds good.
That's all we have.
Excellent job. Does anybody else have any specific questions? Nothing, anything in particular? I've got something, just, of course, I always have a question. I had a parent come to me who has a couple of very young children in the schools, and this is just sort of anecdotal, but she was surprised. I think it was a first-time round of recognizing funding that happens through the PTOs. And, it sort of resonated with me because it's a situation that has been going on for a very, very long time, and that's the inequity in the PTOs and their ability to raise funds. So you have a couple of schools who have a very different set of individuals in there and parents and what they're doing, what their lives are, harder to get volunteers, and it's much harder to raise cash. And then you get a school which, doubles or triples the way they are able to raise funds. And the impacts on that is pretty significant for each school. Because what do the PTOs use their money for? Books for libraries and supplies and all of those things. Once upon a time, and I think it still happens, is, all the PTO presidents would get together, and I think that happened, I don't know, back in 2008 or 2009, where the PTOs got together and met regularly. And at one point, there was even a discussion about pooling or sharing funds because of that. Now, how do you address a problem like that? Is that something that's on top of a list for you to think about or do? I don't even know how you fix something like that.
Yeah, so, I think that's something they start, I've been here 5 years.
Yeah.
We started tackling it with the previous superintendent.
Right, it's been a long time.
So now, right, like you have donations that come in, for example, if it's over $1,000, it goes to the school committee.
Right.
But, there are some PTOs that raise more money.
Right.
So we became really cognizant of that fact a while back. So, one school, for example, was buying more Chromebooks. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, in 2012, I was the principal of the Thompson. We couldn't cobble together 20 working computers in the building.
Right, and then you have another school, and that's a real serious inequity in the schools, when you talk about
it's not in this sense.
Okay.
Let me tell you about
Okay.
it. I mean, I see what you're saying, and it was for many years, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Not that long ago. But, for example, we had a school buying Chromebooks. Well, making donations of Chromebooks before we got all the money to get every student a Chromebook. And so it had to come through our office. And so what we would have to do is look at, okay, well, if they're getting these Chromebooks here, we have to they can make that donation and we'll go to that school, but we may have to pull Chromebooks from that school and we'd look at the ratio. So Mike Grant would look at the ratio and say, okay, we're on average between 2 computers to every 1 student. And, the high end might be at one school at 2.3 computers to every 1 student, and the low end it was maybe 1.8. So we'd have to look at that and redistribute. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I remember that. I remember you going through that, because the Chromebooks was, actually, a physical thing, and you could say, hey, every student should have one of these, not just those kids in that particular school. But then again, when you have a school that's able to raise $60,000 for a fundraiser, and another school who there's just no way, over 2-3 years, they wouldn't be able to raise $60,000. I mean, that's a pretty big inequity piece. Is there any way to address, and that's just cash that they have to spend on library, like library books and supplies and stuff like that. So, relating it to the Chromebooks, I mean, how would you say to people like, oh, you have more books than this school? I mean, how do you address that? And I'm not saying that you should have this answer right now, but it's a tough one.
We can give you an answer.
Okay.
Some of that question, for example, if a North Andover education is going to be a North Andover education, many of the books we've bought, we've increased every elementary school classroom library between 400 and 700 books over the last 5 years to each individual classroom library. Any requests that come in, for library books through the librarians. They work with Lorene Marks, and she kind of does what Mike Grant does. We take a look at, okay, there are some places that might have more people on a wish list. Like, have you guys went to the Scholastic Book Fair? Right? So we know that there's donations that way, and that's something we have to keep an eye on. And so when Lorene uses, whether it's grant money or operating money, to put money towards that, great. We will add those additions based on requests. But I also think it's really important to know, like through the operating budget, something like the library. So libraries, it wasn't long ago we didn't have any libraries. In 2012, we didn't have any libraries open in elementary. Next year, we'll have, I think it's 5 full-time librarians, but the library media specialists are more than just that. So, through the operating budget, for example, besides adding books, and Jim, you can talk a little bit about how we budget that and line items for next year, but, there's subscriptions, there are online books, there are subscriptions to different components, and a lot of what library media specialists do now could be a little bit different than strictly books. So the ability to add the librarians and the ability to, use funding to put books in the library based on request. For example, all the schools, I forget the name of the the youth organization, children's organization. Like every school, we bought books for all of the award-winning children's books for the elementary schools to put in all of the libraries. So those are things we do on a regular basis.
Do you have a question?
I have just a comment, or I guess a question or a suggestion, I don't know. I was actually a PTO president at the time that the whole Chromebooks and model classroom came to be. And my feeling, Chris, to answer your question, is the way that more equity can be achieved is by identifying the big, important to learning or experience things that PTOs are funding and raising those to the school committee or the school administration to say, we feel this is an important thing. And I guess pursuing a conversation around, is this something that can be funded through the operating budget or through, incorporating it into our longer term plan, which is what we did with the model classroom, I think, as opposed to having to relying on PTO funding.
Yeah.
And then that way, if it's provided by the school budget, it's obviously more equitable because the school budget is going to have a plan for all the schools. Yeah. So I guess that's my comment. My question is for the public to hear, I guess, I believe that it is the case, but I would think that the PTO presidents would be raising in these regular meetings, because I did participate in regular meetings with the superintendent at the time, which was Dr. Price, and the PTO presidents. We did raise, here are what we think are the important needs or things that we're fundraising for or what have you. And then that got raised to the superintendent, and at the time she could, think about how we might incorporate those into the budget. And I'm assuming that Dr. Gilligan does the same, but I would just share that as I think that's the way that it can
makes
be,
sense. I imagine things
made.
change over the years too. I mean, there's never the same people in the same places because your kids get older and you're
Right.
off, and then it's
Move on.
sometimes reinvented all over again. So it's just something that is but an ongoing issue, and there's no easy solution, but it's always something to be aware of.
Yep, it's always a challenge. I can remember when I first started that a couple of schools had gotten smart boards and created inequity in that regards.
Yep.
And since I've been here, I know administration has been very sensitive to inequities, and there's a lot less examples of creating inequity. The PTOs are still very active in getting things,
Yeah.
but there's not a lot of things where it's creating inequities. It
That's
comes
good
up,
to hear.
but because we're sensitive to it, we try to mitigate that and catch the other schools up to that through other means. And I think the libraries are a great example.
Yeah.
I know that Lorene Marks went over this during a presentation to the school committee, but I don't know a lot of people realize it. Over the last couple of years, we've really taken advantage of the opportunities of grants and this ESSER funding and ARPA funding, and we've infused not only our libraries but our classrooms with library books, so they don't even have to go to the library to get reading material, with over $400,000
Yeah.
in new books
That's
in the
amazing.
district. And that's why you don't see a lot of money in our budget for libraries, because we've just gotten a tremendous amount of material. And the other part, as Dr. Gilligan was alluding to, is the fact that when we provide our schools with an allocation of, let's say, $30,000 a year for different materials, and they figure out, okay, this year we need this, so it shows up in different lines. The following year, and some lines might be zeroed out, the following year they need it different places, so they put it there. And so in any one given year, it might look like libraries aren't getting anything. In the next year, they're planning on getting what they need.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different reasons for it.
There's a lot of moving parts, and
There
like
is.
one year a school might need a laminator. Like when I was at the high school, we didn't have laminators. When
Who
I taught
doesn't
high
want a
school,
laminator?
and you go to elementary, and that laminator is on all the time. I mean, everything's laminated because they want to reuse it, and they create a lot of great stuff. But so you might see something in a line item that says, "Oh, well, why doesn't the school have that?" Well, they don't need a laminator this year. So really great points, Jim. And I do meet with the PTO presidents, Regina, every month. It's a great group, very active. And I think the one thing, too, is like the school size. The schools are all different sizes, right?
Yep.
Like, so if a school does raise lower money, like the Kittredge School, I think it's 260 students, whereas the Sargent School is probably closer to 600 students.
Yep.
So in terms of sometimes that can be deceiving, but
True.
it
Good
is something
point.
we've really kept. We've really worked hard
Yeah.
because
I'm glad to hear
everyone
it.
here should have equal access to an excellent education, no matter what. And in a strange way, I mean, COVID's been very difficult on anyone, but the way we've worked with Melissa and the way we've worked with the school committee and the select board, like it's been, we've used it to our advantage with the funding available to get positions in a much faster way that we had in our long-term plan, and the ability to sustain it. It's all about sustainability, because you have to be able to sustain it. You don't want to fall off that cliff. And we've worked hard on it, and we'll continue to do so.
Well, we'll be very excited to see building at the middle school. I think that's just amazing, so looking forward to it.
Should start this summer.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's great. It really is. We really appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much.
And I'd be remiss just not to say, like, I'm really excited too. Like, I was so thrilled that town meeting passed the, the facilities master plan too.
Yeah.
But it's exciting that we're going to get MSBA funding to the tune of
It's
50.1%
just like-
for the Kittredge School, which will
Yeah.
take a huge burden off
Yes.
the taxpayer
Yeah.
and allow us to put money forward. So thank
Yeah.
you to everyone for everyone's hard work on facilities master plan too, which isn't just schools, it's town
Yep,
and schools.
Town. It's all one. It's
Folks, thank
all-
you.
It's all
Thank
one.
you.
Thank you. You take care. All righty, a lot for you all to think about. And along those lines, I think, obviously, what we're going to have to do at probably a subsequent meeting is make recommendations for these. And I really don't think it's appropriate to do now. I'd like to have Donovan here and hopefully a larger group. But, so hopefully we'll be able to do that, and give a thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't know that I feel comfortable doing that now. If you all are okay with that, give you some time to think about it too, because it's a lot of information for us to ingest. I don't see that there's anything huge that we're going to be, especially
Point
especially the school budget. I mean, like,
Yeah.
this isn't rocket science here, so.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, so that will be handled another time. I did want to ask anyone if they had any issues with whatever pieces of the warrant letter they were putting together, if they were comfortable with what they were doing. Everybody's, good with that. One thought, because we haven't done it, we didn't do it last year, is a piece on the CPC. I don't know whether we want to do that or not. I mean, I think that by that coming out of my mouth, it would probably be me. But it's something to think about, but we don't have to decide on that now. It's just, we can make an opinion about that later.
Are there copies of warrant letters anywhere floating around?
Yes,
that we
absolutely.
can
If you,
just,
online,
Yeah.
if you go online into the town website, you will see a tab that's called Town Meeting, and within it is all kinds of documents, and you'll see last year's.
Okay, that's
So,
what I want
I
to look at,
mean,
just to kind of give me an example.
Yeah, so,
how they're-
and the very first
how
thing
they're
you'll
laid
see
out.
is the Finance Committee letter.
Okay, great.
And that's first thing, and you can go back to other ones of past years, too.
Great.
Anyway, you definitely can. And if you have trouble with anything, just let either me or Donovan know, and we'll make sure you get what you need. The last item on our agenda is approval of minutes from March 6th. So I will entertain a motion if everybody's had a chance to take a look at that.
I move we approve the March 6 minutes.
Move for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have to do a roll call vote, so we will start with our folks on the monitor over there. Nancy?
I'm good with the minutes.
Yes, regarding the minutes, do you have just a
Yes.
approval or disapproval?
Yes, oh, approved, yes,
Okay.
approved.
And Regina?
Yay, I approve.
Okay,
Yay.
I say yay.
Approved, yay?
Yay.
Okay, and it is unanimous. Okay, our minutes are approved. And the last thing is adjournment. We have a motion to adjourn, unless anybody else has any comments before we do that.
Great. Move we adjourn.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay,
Yes.
yes,
Thank you all. Yes.
yes.
Approved.
Yep.
Nancy?
Regina King, yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we are adjourned.